you all know how this pandemic has thrown off all of our regular routines. One that has really hit me is the ability to exercise in the ways that I usually do. Normally in the course of the week, I'll take off down the Greenway for a run, or I'll head over to the gym. Well, gyms are closed, the greenways are closed, so I'm having to find these other ways to exercise. And so one place that has become a regular place to work some miles in and do some hills has been the Evergreen Cemetery here. It's got lots of little looping trails throughout, and whenever I'm in here, I'm never the only one. There's kids riding bikes, there's people pushing baby strollers, there are people running and walking through the cemetery all the time right now when the weather is nice. What's probably less common for those other individuals who are pushing baby strollers or riding bikes through here is that they haven't buried the people whose headstones are in this cemetery. I counted this week. Since the 5 years that I've been at Raleigh Court Pres, we have had 9 of our members who have been buried in this cemetery. Harry and Mary Jo Shannon, Marie Williams, Betty Merritt McFadden, Lou Merritt, Phyllis Walford Stevens, Barbara Branch, Patty D'Angelo, and Evelyn Wade. So my usual entrance into the cemetery is not in running gear with earbuds in my ears, but it's following the lead car from the Raleigh Court Presbyterian parking lot with the flashing lights and the headlights on into the cemetery, locating the funeral home tent, driving up alongside the curb. It's standing to make sure that the family arrives, that older members of the family have a more sturdy younger person to hang on to as they struggle through the soft earth to make their way to the graveside. It's the director who tells me which direction the head is facing, so that when I leave the graveside service, I can place my hand over the head of the deceased for one final blessing before they are laid to rest. Then we lead the procession. I'm in the front. The pallbearers struggle with the casket, always really struggling as they carry it over those wooden planks to lay it over the hole that has been pre-dug, the dirt laid out behind it, covered with a piece of astroturf. Children, spouses, siblings, they occupy that front row. Others typically stand around just outside the covering of the tent. The graveside service is brief. It's about 90 seconds. Then some handshakes and some casual conversation before the family leaves and the body is finally lowered into the earth. And so I'm standing in the Evergreen Cemetery today, and I'm recalling these words from the Apostle Paul from Romans 14, verses 7 to 9. We do not live to ourselves, and we do not die to ourselves. If we live to the Lord, and if we die to the Lord. So then whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's. For to this end Christ died and lived again, so that he might be Lord of both the living and the dead. When Paul says to ourselves in those verses, we can also translate that for the sake of ourselves. We do not live for the sake of ourselves. We do not die for the sake of ourselves. We live and die for the sake of the Lord. This is why Jesus suffered death and was raised, to be the one we live for and the one we trust in our dying. Interestingly, Paul makes this oft-used funeral statement in the midst of a section of the letter to the Romans about judging how other people live their faith in God. It is an admonition not to be about judging who is doing faith better than others. It isn't about you. It's about the Lord. So pay attention to your own witness, he says, and trust your life and your death to God. Run through cemeteries in gratitude to God, and then live your days in love for other people. Leave the final assessment of everybody else out there, leave that up to God. That's not for us. It's in that promise that we can celebrate this morning. We can walk, take the baby in the stroller, celebrate the laughter on the pathways in the cemetery. Let me encourage you to see today as an opportunity to live the eternal life of resurrection, to let it flow through you, and to live without fear of where we are headed and who is helping or who's preventing you from arriving there. Let God deal with that. Instead, we can simply celebrate that cemeteries are not haunting places of death. They are places where the saints of our life have been buried, and we venture among them as a visual affirmation that whether we live or whether we die, we are the Lord's.